Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program Gary Neights, who's Senior Director of Product Management at Adelante. And today we're going to talk about the digitization of customer order channels. Now, if you're a supplier, nothing makes you happier than receiving a customer order. And the more orders you receive, the happier you are. However, there are many different ways that a customer can communicate an order, from highly automated approaches, to manual entry. So what challenges does this create for suppliers? And, how can technology and digital networks help to streamline and automate the order to cash lifecycle? Well, that's going to be the main focus of today's, episode and conversation. And it's great to welcome Gary back to the program to share his insights and perspective on this topic. So, Gary, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Adrian. It's great to be back.
Yeah, well, it's great. The last time you were on the program, we talked about, supplier portals and kind of some of the challenges there and some of the innovations taking place in terms of integrating that as part of the overall order, life cycle. So here we're kind of broadening it out a little bit more now, talking about really all the different challenges. And, like I just said in my opening comments, receiving from an order from a customer, it kind of sounds simple, but in reality, it's really a challenge for, many suppliers. Why is that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And a lot of companies, or I should say, there's not a lot of companies that are focused on automating customer orders. There's a lot of companies that are focused on automating suppliers or logistics providers. And that's a relatively easy task, because if you are the procurement department or the logistics department, you can essentially say, here's how I'm going to deliver my order to you, because you're in the driver's seat. But when you're a supplier and you're dealing with customers, you have to take their orders pretty much however they want to give them to you. It could be, written on the back of a napkin, or they might say, hey, monitor my tank and resupply me when I'm about to go empty, or monitor my rail cars. I'm going to send you the order via an email, and it might be a PDF or it might be an Excel file, or I want you to integrate into this system or that system, or I want you to go to a portal. So there's all this variation that a supplier has to deal with. I think that's one of the challenges. There's also process variation. You could have the easiest type of order to automate is if your customer's sending you a purchase order. That's pretty straightforward. But sometimes they might send you a scheduling agreement, which is a specific way of exporting data out of an SAP system. We see it in consumer packaged goods in the automotive industry. And that could be done manually. It could be processed manually by a customer service rep, but it's very tedious. So you might need applications to actually help you process it. So you have this process variation, you have format variation, and the supplier really has to deal with that because they want to take the order however they can because it's revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know how many companies take orders by napkin, but I'm sure if it's a high or if it's a big revenue order, they'll take it by napkin if they have to, right? And
Yep.
and then just manually punch it in. But I think you provided a great overview there, because I think you're right. I mean, there's some very highly automated ways, like VMI, like you talked about. Hey, a supplier, monitor our stock levels or tanks or whatever the case might
Yep.
be, and when it hits a certain threshold, automatically generate that order and replenish.
That's right.
To some of these more manual approaches, where it could just be an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF, and someone then has to manually type that into the supplier, that has to manually type that into their systems to kind of so the human is the digitization approach is fingers on a keyboard, right?
Yes, yep. And that actually brings up a really good point, because a lot of times you end up with these, I'll call them hidden factories, because when a human is typing them in, they have all this knowledge in their head, and they're not just typing in the order, but they're transforming it from one system to another. And one of the things that can cause to happen is you lose some of the, you introduce latency into the process. Because if you automated that process, the order would flow from one system to the other almost instantaneously, instant demand capture. When the processes are somewhat disassociated, where you have to have a person doing that manual entry, oftentimes that introduces a time lag, and that can limit the responsiveness of the supply chain.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I gave a presentation earlier this week at the Food Shippers Association, and one of the things I was talking about in terms of digital transformation is, the different sources of waste that are out there.
Hmm.
And one of the biggest sources of waste is waiting, right?
Yes.
Uh,
Yep.
and I think what you just talked about is kind of an example of that, where you've got this kind of, a process is kind of paused because you're waiting for someone to actually then enter the information into some system for it to go into, onto the next step. And so there's a lot of, waste in supply chain, particularly from a waiting,
Yes.
standpoint. Now, I mean, I think, dealing with these different, ordering channels is really only part of the challenge, because companies also have to deal with data synchronization. Can you explain what that is, number one, and number two,
Yep.
why is that also important?
Yeah, no, data synchronization is a huge problem. I was at a conference and a gentleman spoke. They spent several $1,000,000 trying to identify obsolete part numbers that they could retire from their SAP system. And he said, we did that 5 years ago, and guess what? After spending millions to identify them, bringing in consulting companies and everything, 80% of them were still in service, because they just couldn't get rid of them because the way the systems were intertwined with their suppliers, with their customers. And that's the heart of the problem is, so one company has trouble getting their data synchronized. It is much more challenging than to try to synchronize across companies. So a buyer might have 5 product numbers. The supplier supplies them with 7 different ones. A customer service rep in the middle knows the subtleties of that to be able to translate this product number sometimes into product A and other times into product B. And so we see that really coming into 3 main areas. One is product cross-referencing, the product IDs. Another is unit of measures. Someone might order it in pounds, but they want it delivered in cases, a packaged unit. Then you get into things like, what are the conversion factors? What are tolerances? Because you can't ship half of a drum, let's say. You're going to have to round it to full drums. Another one is locations. We've seen cases where if it's a certain product in a certain quantity, it needs to go to the delivery location at the rail yard a mile away from the plant. Or if it's a different quantity, it needs to go to a warehouse on the plant. And the customer will just communicate, send it to my plant. And someone has to make all those translations. And so we've been dealing with these types of things in process manufacturing for over 2 decades. The company's been around for 20 years, and we've done this in many different ways. We just rolled out a product called Enrich that really turns the solution of that problem into a packaged, highly configurable service that's available on the network. And we see a lot of uptake in that because it's a big problem, that data synchronization between ERPs.
Those are some great examples there. And again, it just blows my mind all the time. It's a miracle that stuff gets to point A to point B. When you think
Yep.
about the more you dive into these things, you realize how complex some of these things are, right? Because you're right. The way the customer calls a product within their system could be completely different than the way the supplier calls it within their system, and you're just making sure that you do that translation to get it right is
Yep.
critically important. Again, I think historically a lot of that has been done manually, or someone with a calculator trying to convert
Yep.
one unit of measure
That's right.
into another. And we all know, again, we talked earlier about latency, and but the other thing is data accuracy. Then
Yep.
that whenever you have a human involved, you're introducing the possibility for errors and mistakes to happen because of that manual entry, and then that can create complications. And I think maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, those things would happen, and it's okay, I'm sorry, and you would kind of correct it. But now in this age where things are happening so much more quickly, where companies are starting to compete on customer experience and customer
Yes.
satisfaction, those types of mistakes, I mean, the tolerance for them,
Won't tolerate it.
people won't tolerate it anymore, because that could be the difference between a plant shutting down or not, or it could be the
Right.
difference between making making a sale or not. And so the stakes are much higher today than in the past.
No, they are, and it's a moving target too, because with faster product development life cycles, faster time to market in the drug industry. It's no longer, can I sell 1 billion of these pills next year? It's more targeted, segmented drugs, and so the product life cycles are shortening, and there's many more of these products. So it's a problem that's not going away. It's actually getting bigger. And one of the things that we saw that we had to build into it was basically a self-correcting nature to the problem. You set it up once, you can't assume it's done. We want to have real-time, very helpful alerting if something new comes in, something new came in, pops up a screen, haven't seen this before, how do you want to treat it? And make that very easy for customer service so that we reduce that latency and increase that accuracy.
Well, I just talked about that, kind of brings me to my next question, because obviously, this is all areas where technology, can help automate and streamline a lot of these things. So how is, how is technology, and particularly in a digital network environment, helping, to streamline and automate, all aspects of the order to cash lifecycle?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, if you start at the first step, it's really order entry is one of the first steps where digitization can help. Being able to receive that email order and process it into the ERP system. Being able to handle a order that is exported as NIDOC out of a large customer system. We see this stratification out there with order entry, where you have it's a Pareto, it's a normal type curve, where you have relatively some of our customers, some of our clients have like 20,000 customers, a really large number, and maybe 100 of them have 100 of their customers can support like an EDI or XML connection. So but they send a lot of orders. Then you have this group that's in the middle. Maybe there's like 2,000 or 3,000 of those customers, and they send a more medium amount of orders. And we see a lot of them being automated with a product we have called Quick Link Email in that middle group. But then you have this long tail that historically has been really challenging to deal with. Literally you have 15,000 customers. Some only send orders in 5 times a year. Others send in 70, and there's a lot of variation there. So we're rolling out a product to help deal with that too on the order entry side, so that we can have a set of tools that all come through our network with that enriched product cross-reference type of capability, and the other solutions that we have, things like visibility. All the customer orders, from big ones to small customers, can all flow through the network through that one channel. But the first part's order entry. And then the other thing, I think you mentioned, being able to see, the visibility, being able to link up that order with the transportation information. Because what a customer really wants is the right product to be delivered at the right time to the right place. And, they expect that. When it doesn't happen, it doesn't matter if it's because the transportation provider failed, or the order got delayed because someone was sick, or a box was dropped in the warehouse. The customer doesn't really care why. They just want their stuff to get there on time. And so what our visibility tools do is it links up the information, the order information, the confirmation, the booking when it occurs with the carrier, the actual shipment status that's occurring as the product is en route, so that we can see through the order lifecycle what's going on, and predict that there might be a problem. Because you might have an operational issue that slows it down, but by expedited freight, you can get the order there on time, that sort of thing. Another area where we see with one of our recent acquisitions of a quality company is being able to digitize a certificate of analysis, where you can have a finished goods certificate of analysis that includes the lineage, batch information, lot information of the component raw materials that went into it. And so that can be a very powerful tool, probably best applied when you have highly critical materials. It's probably not worth it, for every product every day. But those are some of the kinds of things that digitization, can help with. Oh, and one last one I was just thinking of also is we're starting to see more and more multi-echelon supply chain, where the order comes in. You might want to have visibility potentially into not just the supplier's stock levels, but if you have awareness of certain raw materials that are upstream of that, being able to see that end-to-end visibility, or if there's intermediate stocking points where you want to take your product, store it at a location so that you can distribute it out. So digitization lets you see those different nodes in the supply chain.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think visibility is obviously, it's always one of those hot topics, but it
Yep.
certainly applies here as well, right? Because customers always want to know, you know,
Where's
what's
my
the
stuff?
status of my order? Did you get my order? Is it in process? When's it going to be completed? When's it going to be shipped?
Yep.
And then when it's over on the transportation side, you're right. Is it in transit? Is it going to be late? And so forth. So I think, being able to connect all of those dots and be able to provide that visibility to clients is important. I think the other aspect of this, and where I think, I've always been a big proponent of network-based, platforms,
Hmm.
is, this really creates the network effect. I mean, I think it's mind-boggling when you think about a supplier having 20,000 customers, which is great, right? But all those customers, as you talked about, each having, if all those customers have such a diversity of ways to communicate in order, I mean, you want that on your end, at your ERP system or your system, for all those orders to come in a common format, if you will, so that you internally have visibility in terms of all the orders that you have that have come in, what the revenue opportunities are, what the shipment requirements are, and so forth. So being able to just make that one connection to the platform and have access to orders from 20,000 participants, rather than you as a supplier going out and making 20,000 individual connections. I think that's where, that would have been the case, many years ago, right? Where you had to do that, or,
Yep.
you did that with EDI with
With all
that
those
subset,
point-to-point connections.
those point-to-point connections via EDI, but you lost that long tail, right, of supplier, of customers that, you needed to capture in here. So I think just the ability to scale order capture in all aspects of supply chain, really, through this network effect, I think is another powerful, capability of this.
Well, and you made me think of something else with the network effect. If I was an individual supplier and I needed to come up with all those tools and technologies to be able to address that entire long tail and all of the different process nuances, that manufacturer would become an expert in our domain of e-commerce. We can offer that solution at a lower cost point to our customers because we're most of these things are not really that differentiating. They actually can be differentiating, but we can offer them because we build it once and offer it to many in a multi-tenant environment. We can actually lower their cost to serve at that very high service level. So I think that's another aspect of the network. You can kind of like buy into it and you get it without having to develop the competence to build it and maintain it over time.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing thing. I mean, for
Yep.
years now, I've told manufacturers and retailers that you've got to get out of the B2B connectivity business. It's
Yep.
not the business that you're in. If you're a manufacturer, you're in the manufacturing business. If you're a retailer, you're in the selling,
Yes.
business. But B2B connectivity is a critical component to get your job done. But there are ways that you can view that as a utility, if you will, or as a service that you can tap into to leverage the technology and the capabilities to help you do what you need to get done in that area.
Yep.
So ultimately, I mean, can you share with us some of the benefits that companies are experiencing by using kind of this network-based approach to order management?
Yeah, I mean, starting with the order entry, you have efficiency, you have fewer errors, you have less latency. I think those are some pretty basic ones. You start to also get into some operational benefits. If the orders are flowing in automatically, the operational side of the business has more time to react, especially if it's like a same day order. If you have a cutoff time of let's say 10 o'clock in the morning. And if you get the order in by 10 o'clock, we'll make sure that we deliver it that same day. With automation, you might be able to push that to 11 o'clock and increase your revenue. Also, with automation, if it comes in at 10 o'clock, but the person was called away and doing something else, the customer expectation is they got it in at 10, but then if customer service couldn't get to it until noon, suddenly other parts of the organization might be scrambling and it might have a higher cost to serve. So you can address some of those things through the automation. And I think another one there is going to be working capital. A lot of times you end up carrying more inventory just to deal with those process issues. And so the more you can streamline those processes and make them more efficient, you can optimize your working capital. And now I'm just thinking about the process of digitization too. That can be another place where you get value in the organization, because when these processes are manual, a lot of times management doesn't know everything that's going on at a nuanced level. Um, when you go to automate it, you start to extract that information. Then you realize, hey, this person's doing it one way, this person's doing it another way. They have half a best practice, they have half a best practice. Let's pull that together and automate it. And you can actually, step up the process efficiency, or the process capability, and also make it more efficient with the technology. So I think there's a process component too through digitization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you have now, by having all this information now in a much more electronic, way,
Yeah,
um, you know, from a
better
business
reporting.
intelligence, yeah, better reporting, from a business intelligence and analytics standpoint, you've got much more richer set of data now that can, from a predictive standpoint or machine learning standpoint, will help you move away from being kind of a reactive type of organization to one that's more, proactive, and obviously, a lot of the buzz numbers, predictive. But I think the bottom line is that, by getting away from some of this manual processing and keying in information and the latency and so forth, you're just now, another value added benefit is that you have access to a much richer and more real-time view of how your business is actually operating, and what the demand looks like, and how that's translating into the operation side, to help you drive continuous improvement within your organization in a much more faster way than you could historically.
Well, yeah, and that's totally true. And you made me think about a meeting that I was at recently where we were talking about our metrics that sits on top of the data. And this was with a customer that had 4 or 5 very different type of business units. And they said, well, um, can you craft your metrics like on time and full type of metric? Can you craft that to the individual metrics of each of the business unit? And I just said, no, that's not how we architected and configured. We can do anything, but that's not how it works now. And one of them said, actually, that's a good thing, because we want our businesses to measure themselves all the same way. And what they've been doing historically with the internal metrics is they've been basically cheating on the metrics to all make themselves look good. And they saw that as a benefit, that we had one consistent way of measuring this data. I mean, we know what the customer request was. We know what the promise was. We know what the actual delivery date is. We have one set of accurate metrics that really can't be gamed.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. So Gary, so as a way to wrap up, I mean, what
Mhm.
questions should companies ask themselves to assess whether they're a leader or a laggard when it comes to the digitization of customer orders, and what steps can they take to get started and move up that maturity curve?
Yeah, I think to determine if you're a leader or a laggard, I mean, I think one thing you'd want to look at is some very basic metrics, like what percentage of your customers are automated, hands-free? What percentage of your orders? That can give you some basics. I mean, I'd say world-class at this point would be to have 80% of your orders totally automated, because there's always going to be some aspect of the long tail that just needs a lot of hand holding. But I think that's one, number of customers and orders automated. Another one would be more getting into the innards of the ERP. They might be automated into the ERP, but then how far inside? Like, are there touches that have to be done inside the ERP? Because it ends up being a journey. First, you want to get your orders automated into the ERP. Then you're going to start to find over time certain products don't need to be touched. You can do ATP on those, and the first time they get touched is when the picking ticket kicks out. Other ones need to have other transportation arrangements. So you start to, through analysis, figure out what are those things inside the ERP that you can automate to get closer and closer to the order starts in the customer system. And then the first time you touch it is when you're going to ship it. I mean, that's a nirvana, but it's a journey to get there. Just trying to think here. Another one would be basic customer satisfaction. Like, what are your customer satisfaction rates? Are customers satisfied? Are you delivering on time? Because order automation can help with those types of things. But to me, it's all about customer satisfaction at the end of the day, and doing things to help increase revenue.
Yeah, no, great metrics to think about as you get started on this journey. I think you can just look around your office, and if you're seeing a lot of people typing in orders into systems, that's a clear
Yeah.
signal that you're a laggard versus a leader in this area. Well, Gary, as always, we always manage to scratch the surface on these topics, but I think this is a topic that may not necessarily be one of those hot and sexy buzzworthy topics out there, but obviously has a critical component of the supply chain that with a lot of opportunity to drive efficiencies and benefits within companies. So I think this is something that a lot of companies ought to be looking at and thinking about. So I appreciate you making the time to kind of share your insights and advice on this topic.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you've got a question or a comment for Gary and you're watching this on demand at the Adelante website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got and you want to ask him a question, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. And again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.
Looking forward to it. Have a great day.